And I don't think anybody realized that that punishment would hurt so bad.
Welcome to this very special edition of What's Going On Around Owensboro with the Owensboro Public Schools. I'm Dave Kirk, the Public Information Officer for Owensboro Public Schools, and today I have a very special guest named Steve McFarlane, who of course is no stranger to Owensboro Public Schools. I'm going to go ahead and let Steve tell you a little bit about, first off, if he was a student or not for Owensboro High School or Owensboro Middle School or just any of the schools, and then how he came back to us later in life.
Well, David, I was a student. Wasn't a real good student, but I was a student. I actually started at Longfellow and worked my way all the way through to Owensboro High. Graduated in '77. Went off for a little while, came back to work here, and I think it was 1991 as the Youth Service Center Coordinator at Owensboro Middle. And I was there 20 years and just retired in 2012. So I've been gone a little while, but still dear to my heart, this place.
Why do you think Owensboro is, something that I think a lot of people talk about? Owensboro is very dear to their heart. People that don't go to Owensboro, I think even if you ask current students, would say you just don't understand. Why do you think it is such a special place? Why do people have that connection?
Well, that's a good question, but I think part of it is there's no place like it that I've ever found in terms of the diversity of students, the kind of different kind of people you meet, you connect with. Nowhere else in life have I been around so many different kind of people and became friends with, and lifelong friends. And I think that's part of the uniqueness of Owensboro schools. And of course, they've got a great tradition of academics and athletics that you're always very proud of. My children all came through the school, and they're very proud to be Owensboro graduates.
So I know you've always had a passion for writing. I know that's something you did while you were employed with us to share some stories, but you've really taken that passion to kind of a new height once you've retired. Kind of talk to me a little bit about what we're featuring here today.
Well, David, when I retired, someone suggested to me that as part of just something that I could do to spend some time would be to write the history of Owensboro football. Now, that's 120 years of football, and I actually considered it, looked into it, kind of played around with the idea, but it was just too much to get my arms around, and so I sort of let it go. I didn't forget about it, but while my wife and I were living in Cambridge, Ohio, one day, in the book I described this as an epiphany, because it really was for me. Suddenly I had this idea, why don't I write about a particular team or a season? And I knew immediately the team I wanted to write about was the '67 football team. And they had a very unique story. They're very dear to my heart because they were really the first team that I ever remember following as a kid. I was 8 years old in '67. My dad took me to many of their games, most of their games. I have kind of a vague memory of those games, but they kind of it made a lifelong impression upon me, those players. And also was a connection with me and my dad. I think that was a big part of it. I lost my dad in '88. And so, that season, that team connected my dad and I in kind of a special way. So anyway, I decided to write about that team. And of course, they have a unique story. And I'll get into that a little bit later perhaps. But they're unique in terms of their circumstances they played in, how good they were, and sort of the unfortunate aspect of that season.
You've obviously picked a team. You decide the book. How does that name come about?
Well, the story of this team was that they were denied the chance to play in the playoffs because of an incident that occurred the year before. And as you said, we may talk more about that. And I was trying to capture in the title the essence of that story. And it really was, in my mind anyway, a glory denied them. They were never given a chance to play in the playoffs, as I said, and because of that, they were never given a chance to be champions. and they may very well have been because they were that good. And 50 years later, these guys and a lot of the players that I've talked to still talk about that glory being denied them. And so it's not something that went away in their lives. They've thought about it. For 50 years, they've carried this. And I wanted their story to be told. I thought it was worth being told. They were good enough to be recognized. And so it was just perfect circumstances for me to write it.
You said 50 years. So would 50 years be 2000 this year?
50 years will be next football season.
Next football season.
In
So
2017.
Obviously, I know it came out kind of towards the end of last year, but this
Right.
year's really a big year to talk about this book.
That's right.
Let's go ahead and get into the book. Taking on a book obviously is no easy task. It's very readable. I can attest to that. I personally have had the chance to read it, and Mr. McFarlane's been nice enough to donate one of the books for our archive room that we've amassed here over the last couple of years. How does one start with this? Do you interview certain players? Do you just think about what you remember as a kid? I mean, what's the brainstorming process like for something this big of an endeavor?
Yeah, well, I began with just going back and doing as much research as I could on the games and trying to recreate a narrative from all the games based on the newspaper reports. But this story began with getting the information from the Kentucky High School Athletic Association's archives to get the actual accounts of the events that took place in '66 that caused the suspension. And so I began with that and tried to piece together that story. Through the years, I had heard so many different accounts of what took place. And I really wanted to make it as accurate as I could to just tell this is what took place. This is why it happened.
I remember reading in the book you talked about in '66. You don't remember because you were only 8 or 9 years old.
Right,
I think you said.
right.
You don't remember actually that '66 game.
Right.
As far as what occurred. And we'll get into that here in a sec. So a lot of that is research based. I mean.
It is, and so I was able to get the entire file. They sent it to me. It's public record, so it's not like I had some secret file. Anybody could see it. And I kind of poured through all the letters and all the documents and tried to recreate the events of that night. It was November 4th, 1966. And Owensboro was playing here at Rash against Henderson City, which
was two schools.
Right? It was two schools.
Henderson County, now it's just Henderson County. It was two schools then.
That's correct. And they were the big rival. Henderson City was Owensboro's a long-time rival. Probably began with Coach Pointer. I mean, I spent a good amount of time with him, Gerald Pointer, the head coach, and he was great. And it was a real pleasure. And I hope, if nothing else, if I honored him in this book, then I did my job, because he deserved all the accolades for what that team accomplished.
Let's go back, 51 years it would be to that '66 last game of the season, correct?
That's
against
correct.
Henderson City. I know the team, from what I can recall in the book, pretty talented. Didn't have the best year though. Did not have a great record, but nevertheless, anytime there's a game at Rash Stadium, the Devils certainly come to play. Talk me through that game with Henderson City. Kind of how did all this start?
Okay. November 4th, 1966, the last game of the year. Owensboro was 5-4 going into that game. They had a very mediocre year.
For some teams could be good, but for
Owensboro
standards,
right. In fact, in '65 they were 9-1. They come into the '66 season. They only had 4 or 5 seniors on that team. As a matter of fact, the '67 team was really built in '66 because those guys had to play as juniors and sophomores. So, but they took their lumps in '66. The last game of the year against Henderson, it snowed that week. It was a good chance the game was going to be canceled. It would have been a great thing had it been. But as it turned out, they played the game. As I said, it was a very heated rivalry. So there were incidences where fans were involved, throwing snowballs at the officials. There were some controversial calls. There was an altercation at halftime between OHS administrators and the officials. There were players ejected because of unnecessary roughness. I mean, it was all just a combination of things that took place.
Kind of the perfect storm type deal.
It really was. And unfortunately, and the reason I titled the book, in the subtitle, Being Punished for a Crime They Did Not Commit, The seniors in 67 who were juniors in 66 really had nothing to do with what happened that night. It was parents, it was fans, it was administrators, and so that was unfortunate. But that, in a nutshell, was kind of what took place. It was a cocktail of ugliness that the commissioner on, well, it was actually on November 25th, made the ruling that year, a couple of months following the season, that Owensboro would be suspended for the 67 football season from postseason play. They would be allowed to play their games. They were put on probation for, I think, 2 years to follow, that they had to, kind of keep their program clean, which it has been clean for really, in essence, 120 years.
Sure.
And to my knowledge, that team is the only sports team, high school sports team of any sports in Owensboro or Davis County that was ever suspended. And I don't think anybody realized that that punishment would hurt so bad, because no one saw Owensboro being that good in 67. They'd come out of they were 5-5. They lost the game to Henderson City that night, so they ended up 500. Going into the 67 season, nobody really thought they would be that good, but they were very good.
So, going into 67, and I'm sure this is a question that you probably asked several of those players and Coach Pointer, what do you play for?
Right. Well, some of them, Isaac Brown, who was an All-American, and he and I connected in this book, he thought that they would be allowed to play if they won all their games. And there was some players that maybe had that thought in their head that, look, if we can win every game, then maybe they have no choice but to let us be in the playoffs. Sure. That probably wasn't the case. But, their character, and that's one of the things Coach Pointer, Coach Irakane talked about, was this team had so much character that they played with so much heart and desire, even though they knew they weren't going anywhere. Then they had some real outstanding football players, beginning with Isaac Brown. He was an All-American, only the second All-American in OHS history that year. Isaac was a great player, running back. They had George Greenfield, Alfred Thompson. Those guys were excelled at in the OVC after they graduated.
So a couple of those guys went on to Western, didn't they?
Right, they did. Isaac played at Western. George played at Murray State. Alfred at Eastern. Jerry Johnson was a junior. He played at Indiana. He was an all-conference Indiana. So, this was a team that had 5 or 6 guys played major college football, and they were very good. They were good on both sides of the ball. They scored 378 points, but they held their opponents to 27 points total for the season. They went through the first 8, almost 8.5 games not being scored on. And you ask any football coach, that's almost unheard of today to be able to do that. But they were very good on both sides. The other thing interesting about this team, a lot of these guys only played half a season, in effect, because they played half a game. The games were out of reach by halftime. I suggested that Isaac Brown may have had fewer minutes played as an All-American as any All-American in high school history. I don't
because he only had to play a quarter, maybe
That's
a half.
right. I have no way of proving that, but I just suggest that he played a half a season in effect in 67. He was hurt a lot in his junior year. He played backup as a sophomore. So, these guys didn't. The subs sometimes played more than the starters in that season.
That season, there was, the first loss, I believe, if memory serves me correct, was Louisville Flagier. Is that the correct pronunciation? Which would now be what, St. Xavier?
It is. That they became part of St. X, right?
So I know they were a big powerhouse in Louisville. Owensboro was a big powerhouse on the western part of the state. I know that was one of the chapters that especially because until then I don't think they were scored upon.
They weren't. They were scored upon in the second quarter of the Flagier game in Louisville, Manual Stadium. It was their 9th game of the year. And Louisville Flagier was number 2. Owensboro was number 1. It matched up in what was kind of a rare thing to see 2 teams from 2 different classes ranked 1 and 2 in the state being able to play. So it was a big game. It was the biggest game of the year probably in the state. Owensboro traveled to Louisville, and a very controversial game. Owensboro I think outgained them 250 to 70 rushing yards. They beat them up and down the field. Anybody who watched that game could never believe that Owensboro lost.
And I know some of the players could back
Right,
that up. I
that's
remember
right.
reading in that.
When I wrote the book, you know, David, I kind of went through week to week and wrote it in sort of success progression or whatever. And when I got to the end, I felt sad. And there was a sadness about, you know, this is over. They just manhandled practically every team they played, and they went back to the stadium, back to Owensboro, and it was over. And I felt a sadness, you know, for how that ended and the fact that they didn't get to play on because, you know, they really kind of deserved it. It's interesting, those seniors, there were 18 seniors on the 67 team. Those guys never played in a playoff game. And yet their record as football players was, I think, 27-5.
Wow.
I think they had that right. And so, but yet they never played in a playoff game. In 65, they were sort of knocked out, controversial. They didn't have a good season in 66, and they weren't allowed in 67. So it was really a very unusual thing, and that's why I wanted to give the seniors on that team some credit, and I have the picture of them in the book. And the most gratifying thing is meeting these guys. Here, having written the book, and I didn't know a lot of them, and after I wrote the book and got it out there, I'd had these guys contact me, and I'm so-and-so, I played on that team, and how important that book was to them. I mean, that if I never sold another book, I'm telling you, and I don't care, it was just being able to tell their story and honor those guys for what they accomplished and how much they meant to me as an 8-year-old too was part of it. But their story was worth telling. And, you know, it's interesting, I've talked to a lot of Owensboro diehard fans. You know, they know Owensboro. They did not know this story. And I found that interesting. But, yeah, the players have been so thankful to me and appreciative of me writing the book. And that's been the greatest thing. I mentioned one of the great thrills for me, the hero on that team for me was Isaac Brown. And I tell this in the book. I guess I'll give this away. But the book was at the printers. I mean, it was done. And I had left a message for Isaac to call me. And I got his phone number. And I never heard back. And so I was sad because I really wanted to be part of the book. One night while we were in Cambridge, Ohio, I got a call, and it was him. And he said, "This is Ike Brown." And I was just almost speechless. And so we connected. I talked to him on the phone. Actually drove to Indianapolis where he lives and got a picture. My daughter and I went there and met him. And when you write about people you've never met, and then you meet them, you know, it's just kind of a weird thing, but it's a very gratifying thing, you know.
And I'm pulling your leg a little bit, but did they say the people that have read it, those players, did you get it right?
Well, I made some mistakes that they pointed out to me,
I'm sure
you know, but they've been very kind and very, very gracious about it. But, yeah, I'm not going to say everything's completely accurate, but I tried. I tried to get it right.
What's next?
You know, I don't know. I'm just not sure. I'm kind of waiting to see what happens next year. I've even thought of maybe revising this. Here's the thing that happened to me. If I could write it today, it'd probably be another extra 100 pages. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I thought about maybe looking at some other teams, and you know, they say write about what you're interested in, and so I am interested in Owensboro's history and their sports history, and who knows? I haven't really decided, but I may try it again.
If people want a copy of the book, how can they purchase a copy?
Well, they can go to glorydenied.wordpress.com, and you can buy it off of that, or they could contact me. I'm on Facebook, and there's, you know, I mean, probably if they know somebody that knows somebody, they could find a way to get hold of me, and I could save them shipping. But you know, that's the best way to go about it is on that website.
It's $20.
$20, right?
a copy.
$20, yeah.
What's Coach Pointer? I'm sure he's probably read the book by now. Obviously a beloved Red Devil. You know, what was the single most important thing that he told you? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and maybe you've had a chance to reflect on that. But of all the interviews, because I'm sure you talk to him a lot, and he obviously is full of Owensboro history, especially in the football department.
I'll tell you what he said to me, because I made the mistake of saying or asking the question, or maybe I made the statement, was this the best team Owensboro ever had, the 67 team? And he very quickly said, you got to be careful. We've had undefeated teams at Owensboro. We've had great teams that won state championships. He said, you've got to be careful. And I realized later, you know, if you ever go, and I don't know how Gerald's doing health-wise, but if you're ever at an Owensboro game, he usually stands or sits up by the press box. Throughout the night, you will see former players come up and say something to him. And, Coach, how you doing? You know, I'm so-and-so. And he's, of course, always gracious to them. And it occurred to me that, you know, Gerald Pointer would never want to put one team or one player over another. And so whether or not this was the best team, he would never say. I very carefully was not going to say this is the best team ever. And I really respected that about him because I was sort of putting him on the spot.
Anything else you want to add?
No, David, I appreciate Owensboro. You know, you guys have been very gracious to me and helpful in getting the book out there. And gee whiz, you know, you're the access to the archives and all the information you guys have provided have been great. And I appreciate you and everybody that's helped me here.
Well, it's been an honor. Anytime, obviously, as a school system, that we can share a little bit of history with our followers, that's what we're going to do. So, for Steve McFarlane, I'm Dave Kirk. Thanks for watching.